Hello, everybody. In this video, I will be talking to Paul Kelly, IT webmaster at the Irish EV Owners Association, about best practices for electric vehicle batteries. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Inge. How's it going?
So, Paul, what is the ideal level of charge, also known as the state of charge?
For your car? Guess it depends on how you're using it. So if you're driving every day, charging to 80-90% every day is fine. If, like, say yourself, you don't drive your car that often, like, you're driving it infrequently, then a typical state of charge that would be recommended would be somewhere between 60 and 80%. And there's a few reasons for that. The worst part about batteries is leaving them at a high state of charge. 100% state of charge in an NCA or nickel, manganese, cobalt, and NMC battery is a high state of charge, and that's what causes them to degrade over time. So when you have there's different chemistries now. So we have what they call LFP, lithium iron phosphate. Those batteries don't have the cobalt in them, and they don't have they don't have manganese, and there's no nickel. So the cathode in those other cells degrades over time. So when we get the LFP batteries in the, say, the newer Model 3 standard range, or just the Model 3 as they call it, that's LFP, and those you can leave them at a high state of charge for, let's not say a long time. Like, you wouldn't leave them at an airport for at 100% forever, but a couple of days at 195% is going to have no problem with those batteries. Whereas your car, my car, kind of the older generation with the NMC batteries, if we leave them at a high state of charge, the battery will degrade quite quickly. So 60 to 80% is your kind of recommended state of charge for old tech, and for the new tech lithium iron phosphates, we're talking anything up to 100%. There's no real kind of magical guidelines.
And should I let the state of charge drop to a certain level before charging?
Not necessarily. But there is some good practice there. Let me just wrap that up quite quickly. So with modern batteries, the big ones, like 100 kilowatts, 90 kilowatts, because they're chemical based, if you constantly charge between 60 and 80%, the battery management system can lose track of the top and bottom of the pack. So sometimes it is good to drop your battery to 10%, charge it to 100, drop it back to 10, back to 100, and then bring it back to, say, 80%. And that's called a battery recalibration. And typically I would do that about once a quarter in my car, because I do a lot of short journeys. I do a lot of charging from 60 to 80%. So, I'm never charging all the way to 100. I'm never discharging all the way to 10 or 15%. So that is recommended, but it's not the general rule. Like, you can just, whenever you get home every evening, you can plug it in. And as Bjorn Island would say, it's as simple as ABC. Always be charging. I like that.
That's good advice.
It is.
Is frequent charging to 100% bad for the battery?
Typically, yes and no. Yes, if it's left at high state of charge. No, if you're, say, planning a departure and you set your car to charge to 100% and you're leaving at, say, 8 a.m. and you get in the car and drive, there's no problem to do that. It isn't recommended for a couple of reasons. One is you get zero regen typically in like 99% of EVs when you go above 95%. So you lose some of that efficiency on the road. But typically it's not an issue as long as it's not left to charge.
And how about fast charging? Is fast charging bad for the battery? And should we avoid fast charging if possible?
Great question. It can be, is the short answer. Fast charging as in DC, like high power charging, 100 kilowatts, 150. Like in a Model 3, you can charge at 250 kilowatts now, and a new Model S and X, whenever we see them in Europe, will do the same. That builds up heat, and heat obviously is not great for a battery. So, infrequent DC charging is fine. I have 28,000 kilowatt hours put into my car roughly, and I think 5,000 of those are DC. so 23,000 on AC, and I've practically no degradation. So my recommendation would be to minimize DC if you can. It's obviously not always like if you have a Nissan Leaf, like a second generation Leaf, or you have any of the older Zoes, like basically anything built prior to 2019 of small batteries, you have no choice but to DC fast charge, and they will degrade, but most of them have 8-year warranties that if you lose more than 30% of the usable battery capacity, they'll actually they'll replace it under warranty. So it's not really that big a deal. But if you can avoid it, I would avoid it.
Is it bad for the battery if it's completely empty?
Yes, completely empty is worse, arguably, than completely full. Like I said earlier, the batteries are chemical based. It's not, just it's like chemicals are unpredictable. And like a normal 12-volt battery, like your standard 12-volt battery, in say a kid's toy, little small scooter, if you drop the voltage too low, it's not recoverable. You can't actually recover the battery. So never ever leave a car battery below in Tesla land below 20%. I'll explain the reason for that in a sec. But I would say never leave a battery lower than 10 to 15%. The reason in Tesla land it's particularly an issue, and it could be an issue in other manufacturers, is that the 12-volt system is maintained by the high voltage battery. And in our cars, when the voltage of the high voltage battery drops below 20%, some of the auxiliary services like maintaining the 12-volt system, they don't operate. So it can be detrimental to the car's 12-volt battery, which is basically how it opens that giant contactor or closes that giant contactor that allows the car to get energized from the high voltage battery. So you're better off keeping it above 20 if possible. And for other cars, probably 10 to 15% is the safest you can do.
20 seems quite high, really.
Depends on the size of your battery, I guess. Like 20% for me is the usable size of a Nissan Leaf 24, which is about 19 kilowatt hours. But that freaks me out because as soon as that little percentage sign goes from white to orange, I'm on full on panic mode. Now, there's no real reason to panic, but it's just I don't like going below 20%. I get anxiety, and there's no reason for it typically because there's somewhere to charge always, right?
So you have state of charging anxiety.
It's not range anxiety; it's state of charge anxiety. It's like my friend Pierre from Germany went to Berlin last year, and when he picked me and a friend of mine up at the airport, he was at like 19%, and I was like, "Are we going to a supercharger?" He's like, "What? Are we going to a supercharger? You're at 19%. Come on, like it's a 2014 Tesla Model S 85 rear wheel drive," and he's like, "No, this I've got 100 kilometers." I'm like, palpitations. I was like, "Okay, it's your car, you know it, go drive it." But I wasn't happy. I did have state of charge anxiety.
I saw one website recommending regular short drives. I usually only drive once or twice a week, and there are weeks where I don't drive at all. Should I be driving more often?
No, it's a car. It's a utility, to get you from A to B when you need to. I don't see any reason why you should be driving more often, other than for the excitement, because obviously, let's face it, driving Tesla's exciting. So we're trying not to be Tesla centric on this because it is the Irish EV Owners Association, not the Tesla Owners Group, which I'm also a member of. But
Is it okay to charge your car every day if you need to?
yeah, absolutely. Again, AC slow charging is best. But then again, like if you need to drive 200 kilometers a day or 300 kilometers a day and your car only goes 150, then DC is your option. So you're going to AC charge at night, you're going to DC charge during the day, or maybe AC at your destination if that's what you need. So it's fine to charge every day, absolutely. And like I said, Tesla recommends you leave your car plugged in, especially if you're leaving it. So leave it at 70%, plug it in, and the battery will go down and then top back up, and it'll go down and top back up, and that'll keep it ticking over.
What should you do if you won't be driving for a few weeks? For example, if you're going on a holiday and are leaving your car at the airport.
Another good question and often asked. Again, it can depend on the type of car you have, the battery generation, but typically, you know, EVs, you want to leave them at between 50 and 60%. And one of the recommendation for if your car has remote access, like an app, don't open the app. Uh, it, Phantom drain used to be a huge problem in Teslas, but I don't think it is really these days. They go into a state of deep sleep. They disconnect themselves from the network and everything. So they actually do seem to handle that very well. I've got a Hyundai Kona EV, and that thing has zero phantom drain. If I arrived at the airport with 20%, I know when I came home it would have 20% or maybe 19.5, but it's so minimal that it's ridiculous. And that does have remote connectivity, not quite as fancy as what we would be used to in Teslas. Prior to that, we had an e-Golf, which again appeared to have zero phantom drain as well. And then, you know, prior to that, I had plug-in hybrids, but you know, they don't really have they don't have connectivity or didn't have any at that point. So I would say it's fine. Just a 60%, 50, 60%. Don't use the app if you have app access. Turn off any kind of scheduled chargers. There used to be a checklist for Teslas. You used to have to go in and turn off, you know, keep connectivity turned on, whole bunch of stuff. All of those options are gone now. The car just looks after itself, which is how it should be, really. You shouldn't have to really think about leaving your car at the airport. Like if you're going on holidays, the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about what charge will I have. It'll be that state of charge anxiety for when you come back. Sweating.
So in the same vein, are all batteries and battery management systems created equal, or are some better or worse than others?
Great question. They're not equal, for sure. Some are better than others, again, for sure. So some manufacturers made a decision to liquid cool their batteries, which means they're actively heated and cooled depending on requirement by the battery management system. They would typically be the ones that can do high power charging as well. So the likes of, say, the Porsche Taycan, who can do 270 kilowatts at a 350 kilowatt charger, all Teslas, I think Mercedes EQC, EQS, all the e-tron electric, fully electric cars, all liquid cooled, and those all have pretty good battery management systems. They have huge top and bottom buffers as well. Some of those, like the EPA rating for the original e-tron 55 was, I think, 207 miles, but the reality is because of the top and bottom buffer, you can actually travel like, I don't know, 250 miles. But they only run them to zero, not running them to when they stop, or you know, whatever the test scenario. It doesn't push it to the limit, whereas a normal driver would get to know their car and will push it to the limit. So then we have the air cooled or non-active cooling battery systems. So the Renault Zoe, the first generation Hyundai vehicles like the Kona and the Ioniq, they were all air cooled. Now the Kona, as far as I remember, has an active battery management system, but it's just air cooled. It's not liquid cooled like the other ones are. So that's slightly better. But as far as I remember, the old Ioniq was pretty bad. And those are, again, to quote Bjorn, they would charge gate. So they would overheat when you were driving long distance, repetitively DC fast charging. Once the battery got to like 40 degrees, that was it. It was game over. You had to either drive really slow or you had to drive really fast and take a long time to charge. It's very inconvenient. And then you have the Zoe, as far as I know, is just air cooled as well. Again, suffers from I think, again, with a little bit on the charge gate side. And then the first generation and second generation Ioniq, the new Ioniq 5 is liquid cooled, all good stuff there. But the original Ioniq, the 28 kilowatt and the 36, the 36 was even worse as far as I remember for poor cooling and heating. very poor charging performance in winter because the battery's cold, and then in summer just gets overheated and has poor charging because of that. I don't think there's a middle ground with those vehicles. They're great city town cars, absolutely, but not great for long journeys. So the reality is that they used to be all equal, and I think we're getting to a point where the bigger battery packs need better battery management, and we're seeing a lot more actively liquid cooled battery packs in all new cars. Like out of the US, you've got Rivian and Lucid, all liquid cooled. They have a glycol loop, and it's heated, cooled as needed. All Teslas, like I said already. A bunch of stuff out of China, like the BYD stuff, as far as I understand, all that's liquid cooled. And then in Europe, we have the new Zoe. Now, I'd have to defer to Jan Bart because he's the expert on that, but I think the ZE50 might be liquid cooled, or it's at least active air cooled. And then you have a range of the ID4, ID3, the new EQC40, not EQC40, the e-tron 40. They're all liquid cooled as far as I know as well. So they're getting there. They're getting better. And it's just a case of having to. They don't have a choice because people aren't going to put up with driving 200 kilometers and then taking an hour to charge, when you can get into a Tesla, drive 300 kilometers, charge in 15 minutes, do another 200, charge for 15 minutes, do another 200. That's the reality of where Tesla have been for since 2013. So it's about time they caught up.
So what are the main factors causing battery degradation? Is it time, mileage, or charging habits? Or is it something else?
Good question. I think a little bit of all three, if I would be perfectly honest. If you DC fast charge a lot, it's going to impact the lifetime of the battery. Over time, it's going to naturally degrade as well, because like I said, it's chemicals in like a piece of metal effectively. And then with mileage, that means more charging, be it AC or DC, it is going to have an effect on it. And then kind of the something else is leaving your NMC or your NCA car battery at 100% for a prolonged period of time, or at very, very low percentage points. Like if you leave it down at 5%, it's going to drain itself, and it's probably going to it's going to die, and it'll die irrevocably. You won't be able to get it back. It'll cost you, in Tesla land, is 25 grand for a 100 kilowatt hour battery. I think I've heard like a Nissan Leaf is 12, Zoe is 15 or 12 or 13 as well. So realistically, it's all of those. I would say, leaving it high state of charge would be one of the main ones, and DC fast charging a lot would be the two primary causes of battery degradation.
How long should we expect the batteries to last then?
Great question. So the answer is forever. And I'll explain that in a way that will make sense to people. When you pour petrol or diesel into a gas car, you light it, and a few seconds later, a couple of milliliters of it are gone. It's become carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, whatever else is in there. It's become CO2 and all these other types of emissions, and it's gone away, right? So when you empty the tank of fuel, the tank is empty. It's literally, there's nothing there. Whereas a battery, when you drain it from 100% to zero, everything that was in the battery when it was manufactured is still physically there. So you just put the energy back in, and that energy is able to be absorbed by the chemicals that are in there. And the reality that we are working towards is that any battery in any vehicle will be about 95% recyclable. So say you do 300,000 miles or kilometers on a battery and it's got to 60%. You go to the manufacturer, or you go to the second-hand battery market, which I think we'll have in a few years' time, and they'll take your battery back and they'll give you a price for it, because it's say an original battery costs 25 grand. It's worth quite a large proportion of that 25,000 euros or dollars in terms of the raw materials that went into the battery. Obviously, there's a cost of the recycling aspect, but 95% of the contents of a battery, the cell, the can, the cathode, the anode, the jelly roll, everything, all of that is recoverable. Obviously, 5% isn't, but 5%, 25k is a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. So your battery is going to last forever in a way. Now the reality is what we're seeing in vehicles is anything from 150 to 300, 400,000 miles on a single battery. I have a friend, Mark, he's now living in Texas, actually in Austin. He has a 2014 Model S. Now he's on a second battery, but the second battery, I think he said he's 230,000 miles, which is 370 or something kilometers on a single battery. That's really good. And it's what an 8-year-old car with no issues other than he got T-boned last week. But so I would expect batteries to last for a long time. There's very good warranties on them. It's 8 years, 10 years, 7 years, depending on manufacturer. Sometimes they go bad, which is fair enough. And by bad, typically, a big pack is made up of a number of modules, and in the modules, a number of cells. And if a number of cells go that are in series, it could affect that module from working. So you could lose 15%. But to protect to protect the vehicle, protect the battery, typically manufacturers would go into the car would go into limp mode and would say, I have a fault and it would have to be diagnosed and repaired. But manufacturers today aren't really repairing modules. They're taking out the whole battery, putting in a new one or a refurbished one that they've tested. But that old battery gets taken away and recycled and reused. Now, we're not at the stage where my $25,000 battery in my car can be taken out and they'll give me 25 grand for it, and I can give 25 grand to Tesla and get a new battery. Well, we'll get to that point at some point in the future where a replacement battery will be the cost of a new one minus the tangible value of your old pack. At the moment, no manufacturer is giving you any value of your old pack. But the reality is, if it's 95% recyclable, it has a high value on the second-hand market. So that will come. And then really just to wrap up, I think most people seem to keep cars 3 to 5 years, some people 8 years. I think if you're going to do big mileage on an EV, you may expect to have to replace the battery after 200,000-300,000 miles or kilometers. But most people are doing 15 to 20,000 kilometers a year in this country at least. So you're talking 8 to 12 years to get anywhere close to that type of mileage.
That was very interesting. Paul, thanks a lot for coming on today.
No problem. Let's do it again sometime soon. Cheers, Inge.
Thanks. Bye.
Good luck.